listening to Margins and Meaning with John Wilson. You know, that chair doesn't feel the same anymore. Not because it's any lighter, but because I understand what it carries now and how long it took me to earn the right to sit in it. So guys, we're 5 episodes in, and episode 6 is going to be something special. It's a little deeper in some ways, and hopefully you will connect with the message. We left off at episode 5, where I had just recently acquired a small Crown and Bridge laboratory. That's probably the wrong terms. I want to be true to the accountability of it all. This lab was going out of business, and a few of the employees knew that I was interested in this. I was very lucky to bring them on, and they brought in their trusted clientele with me as well. For me, it was instant gratification in some way, but deep and meaningful fear in other ways. Because, you see, guys, I was very, very committed and comfortable in the prosthetic realm of this trade, but Crown and Bridge and fixed dentistry to me was a new and scary path to learn. You see, it had its own set of expectations, different failure points, and all of this I was unsure about. But that expectation allowed opportunity as well. You see, we had this long list of trusted prosthetic clients that were ready for us to cross-sell them. You know, if I could implement it properly, I could bring in a whole new segment of dentistry to these offices, and on paper, it looked like I could have instant growth. And in reality, revenue did climb quickly. And for a moment, I felt like I had some relief. But you see, guys, my focus was even flawed then. You know, I was still operating month to month under the constant cash flow pressures, still trying to keep the staff busy, the benches full, and ultimately just having the doors open. All I wanted was a little breathing room, just enough savings in the account to pad it, just enough float to convince me that I wasn't just owning that job again. And what I didn't realize yet was that I wasn't just building a business. I was really just compounding those day-to-day responsibilities. So let's paint the picture. We've implemented a Crown and Bridge department in my small little prosthetic lab, and I thought that this was going to be the easiest path to some relief. Our biggest challenges in those moments was cash flow and having enough to not live month to month. Nothing was worse than trying to figure out if I was going to get enough money in to make the payroll. It was so stressful. I was still owning a job. I wasn't really owning a business. And with that, I was looking for every path to a new location, a new finish line by those means. So the moment we acquired that little department and we brought it in, you know, more stress showed up. It didn't give me relief in the least. You see, my knowledge of that department was minimal. I struggled with it. I constantly asked questions. I constantly took continuing education to understand the clinical challenges. I leaned on my staff hard. I leaned into the feedback that they could give me. You see, I wanted this shared accountability. I wanted to empower my team to make better decisions because they had a better understanding of the process. I needed to learn when it was appropriate to take calculated risk. The first time I saw a technician fudge a die, I was like, what the hell are you doing? I didn't understand that, you know, when it was prudent to scrape a margin based on a doctor's fingerprint or their history. I had to learn when it was absolutely imperative to pick up that phone and make that tough call. Because the hardest part, guys, was not the single unit decisions, it was the ramifications of what that entailed. How are we going to, maintain the trust and the expert level without alienating this client? You see, I was still working in the prosthetic department. It was a hat that I just would not give up. I loved it. And it's where it really grounded me because it was where I felt the most value. But that phone became my leverage point. It was where real value really showed up. I love to explain, to teach, to calm my clients, to actually guide them. But you know what, guys? That Crown and Bridge department was different. I didn't sit there much. I wasn't confident enough yet. I didn't feel like I brought enough value to it. So I was slow to insert myself physically into that workflow, and for most of my career in that lab, I wore every single hat. But this one stayed out of reach just a little bit. Financially, we were still exceptionally fragile. We had workflows and we were gaining a bit of confidence, but everything still depended on cash flow. The profit point that this department was making was surely not understood at that point. You see, the classroom, that laboratory I was learning in was expensive. My losses became tuition, what I call expensive tuition. And compounding that was the reality that we had no real accounts receivable policy. We were at the mercy of our clients. And like all labs, we were unsecured debt. That lesson came painfully, but it shaped everything that followed. And my stress level was just through the roof. As the lab grew, the weight grew with it. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I didn't know. Every day felt like I was patching leaks in a dam, doing damage control, shoring things up, finding ways not to fail instead of building something excellent. That pressure spilled over into my personal life. I was just a mess. And the thought that haunted me most was simple. If I fail now, I don't fail alone. I fail everyone who tied their livelihood to this dream of mine. And that was crushing. That weight was almost unbearable, but I can tell you it pushed me to the next step. So now I got to share this call. This is a very important call. It really guided me down a path in this laboratory over the years. And I recount it because there's been multiple times that I've shared this story, but it really made a difference in this timeline, and I want to share it again. You see, it was a new client, and this was the first time I spoke with them, and he introduced himself. He says, "This is Dr. So-and-so, and John, I've heard such great things about your laboratory. I'm going to send you a full mouth reconstruction." And initially, it was just fear and disbelief. Why is this new client reaching out for a full mouth? And we haven't even worked together. He doesn't really know me. I just did not feel confident in it. I wasn't happy about it. I saw all the negative and downside to it all. But then the case arrived. It was a young patient, and nearly every tooth in the mouth was prepped, and it was prepped poorly. And it was impressed even worse. So the records just were not suitable for a case of this magnitude. I stared at it with disbelief, and this was that moment. I either accept it, gamble, or I make the call that I really didn't want to make. You see, I wasn't in a position to say no. I really needed the work, but I knew I had to. So I picked up that phone, I called, I explained, I asked him to redo everything. And I knew it would be a very long appointment. I braced for the anger, the defensiveness, and the potential loss of this particular new client. Instead, that silence that probably was no more than a couple seconds, that felt like a minute. That time I was waiting for his reaction, then he said, "Okay, thank you," and asked if I'd come by the office so we can talk about how we could get better records. And to me, that was really the first crack of light. Now, I want to be completely transparent here in what I learned in that exact moment. Wasn't that I suddenly had this perfect clinical understanding. I certainly didn't. What I did realize was that I already knew enough to know what was right and what was wrong. We all have that gut feeling. We use it as a barometer at times, but, the truth of the matter is I had ignored it before because fear was louder than the facts. That day, I let the facts lead. Owning the case didn't weaken trust. It strengthened it. Both new relationships and old ones. I was leaving that office in a way that I hadn't many times before. I felt empowered. I watched this doctor listen, ask good questions, real questions. And in that moment, that dynamic shifted. You see, the questions weren't about blame, they were about the outcome. And they were being directed at me as the expert who actually could lead the team and do something better. And that's when I understood how pivotal my role was. Being married to the case isn't a bad thing, guys. The only reason it becomes bad is when you compromise your own beliefs. So I'll tell you guys, accountability didn't suddenly appear. It really was an evolution. My existing clients, I was lucky enough to generate some trust already. We had figured out their fingerprints, and most of the time we knew their strengths and where their blind spots were. We knew which clients we could mitigate risk with and who really needed guardrails. Where everything changed was how I dealt with new clients. We insisted on checkups, check-ins, post and delivery conversations. You see, if I didn't call you when the case arrived in the laboratory, that meant that I was going to own the outcome. My entire business model that I was trying to figure out was this no finger-pointing partnership. Those 10-minute calls at first, they were powerful. They really made a difference. And then for some reason, they started to be diluted. The feedback softened, the conversations became more polite instead of honest, and until they drifted into something more reactionary. The difference this time was, I had documentation. I learned to have these checklists, these notes on this case histories. It allowed me back in those analog days to really understand that data was everything. And while I wrote things down, my real advantage was my memory. I was a bit of a freak in a lot of ways. I read every script. I knew the patient's name. I remember the pan numbers, the shades, the timelines. I had it all in my mind's eye. It was something that I was prideful of. But in that time, that memory wasn't about control. It was actually about seeing patterns. And at that stage, my primary goal wasn't this pure sense of what it was for. It was about survival. I'm doing this no finger pointing workflow. I wanted to protect the bottom line. But more importantly, I was trying to protect my reputation. I wanted to stand united behind every case, even when it was a bit uncomfortable. You see, as my reps increased, so did my awareness. That's the real path to improvement. And while it started as self-preservation, it became credibility in a lot of ways, a connection to my clients. Internally, there was friction. I saw staff make decisions that I didn't align with. And you know what? I heard, we've always done it this way. Well, I'd explained that past performance wasn't the goal. Exceptional outcomes required a different path. Our client base fluctuated. You see, I questioned that trajectory constantly, but I learned something important. You see, alignment matters more than the volume. Not every relationship is meant to last. And that isn't a failure. True excellence in my eyes it depends on limiting variables. If you can control the input, outcomes becomes that much more predictable. Every day I reflected, what could I have said better? Where did communication fail? What moment deserved more clarity? That habit, those 5 minutes of quiet reflection, they changed me. Not by making leadership any lighter, but it made me maybe more intentional. And that made all the difference. So reflecting on all of this, guys, the truth is today my reality is different. And it's not because my core values have changed. They certainly haven't. I like to believe it's because my opportunities did. You see, I chose that smaller staff. I chose relationships intentionally. Those choices brought me peace. They allowed me to focus on what really matters. Trying to find some balance. Finding alignment and doing our best for the people who chose to be here. For years, growth wasn't predictable. But you know what, guys? My goal always was all I really wanted to do in this life was to do good work and to find some happiness doing it. Walking in the lab now, surrounding by people who I want to believe want to be there for the same reasons I do. Well, I believe that alignment isn't accidental. The goals are clear and they're not negotiable. You see, success in this trade gave me something I never expected. Gave me options. Not having the necessity to say yes to everyone was liberating. Finding balance, not just for myself, but for the team and the outcomes we stand behind, well, today the weight is different. Financial security doesn't remove the responsibility, it really sharpens it in a lot of ways. Because the real weight is protecting the people who don't have that margin at this point. If I could speak to my younger self, I wouldn't tell him to work harder. I'd tell him, hey, you know what? It's okay not to be everything to everyone. Excellence isn't singular. It's collective. It's earned. And I think it has to be lived. Guys, if you got through this episode, I thank you for listening, but I really wanted to take a moment to say something clearly. This isn't a self-serving highlight reel of my life. It's not a success story. Certainly not something that is handed down by somebody that figured things out early, because I just didn't. But what it is, guys, it's a record of my life in this trade. It chronicles the pressure, the responsibility, and the choices that I made under fear. And hopefully, the wisdom that only shows up after you paid for it. You see, for a long time, I thought leadership was about effort, about being everywhere, knowing everything, fixing every problem before it surfaced. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I cared enough, if I carried enough weight, things would eventually feel lighter. They just didn't. What changed wasn't the weight, it was how I actually understood it. You see, early on, I confused ownership with the control. I thought being responsible meant absorbing everything, that clinical risk, the emotional stress associated with that financial uncertainty, and eventually, other people's mistakes. I certainly did not know how to separate that commitment from self-sacrifice. And the truth is, guys, nobody teaches you that part. You don't learn it in school. Those reps aren't going to tell you this. And you're certainly not learning it at the bench. I believe you learn it the first time you realize that if this fails, it doesn't just hurt you. It hurts the people who trusted you enough to stand beside you. And for me, that realization changes you. Over time, I learned that excellence isn't being exceptional on your own. It's about that alignment, those shared standards, that shared language, the shared responsibility. It's about limiting those variables so good outcomes aren't just accidental. They're actually repeatable. And that lesson didn't come from theory, it came from all the mistakes. From those horrible, uncomfortable phone calls. From saying no when yes would have been way easier. From standing behind the decisions that weren't popular, but you knew were right. I also learned something else that took me far too long to accept. Guys, it's okay to not be everything to everyone. In fact, trying to be everything is often what prevents you from being anything meaningful at all. You see, I chose a smaller team. I chose fewer relationships. I chose the clarity over the chaos. I don't see those as retreats. They were a commitment. Commitments to doing the work well, to protecting the people who chose to stay, and to be able to build something sustainable instead of just something that was looking impressive. So today, that chair feels different. Not because it's lighter, but because I know why the hell I'm sitting in it. You see, the financial stability doesn't remove responsibility. For me, it sharpens it because now the weight isn't just on survival. It's about maybe a stewardship. It's about understanding that the decisions I make today affect the people that don't have the same margin for error. And that really matters to me. Yeah, I've earned a lot from this, Trey. I've learned even more than I ever expected. And with that comes a responsibility to give back. Not in these silly little sound bites that are in this podcast, but in real honesty. And that's why this episode exists, guys. And it's also going to mark the transition of this podcast. From here forward, the stories will still continue in the John Wilson style, but I'm going to try to go deeper. I'm going to talk more about the materials, the types of appliances that I'm involved in, into specific cases, into technology and the innovation that I just love. It's not going to be a sales pitch. It's not going to be anything more than maybe a brief tutorial here and there, but in lived experiences that I think mean something. What worked, what didn't, why certain paths were chosen, and why others were just discarded away. And eventually, I won't be doing this alone. I want to bring in people into these conversations, people who carried their own weight, who made their own mistakes, who earned their own wisdom. Not to perform, but to share the stage honestly with the same aligned values that I've shared with you. Because the real value isn't pretending we all took the same path, guys. It's understanding why we didn't. And if there's one thing I hope you take from this episode, especially if you're early on in your own journey, it's this. You don't have to rush to become someone you're not ready to be. You don't have to know everything to know what's right. You don't have to carry this weight alone. The one thing you do have to do is be willing to carry it with one thing, and that's integrity. For me, the weight I carry now isn't fear. It's about that stewardship, that legacy. And that's the weight that I'm willing to hold. Thank you.